Well, hello, folks, and welcome to Guitar Talk. This is a show where we talk about guitars, guitar players, and all kinds of equipment and gear. And we know there's a ton of you out there that love this sort of thing. And we have a lot of interesting guests on the show, and today is no exception. When one thinks about blues music in New England, you'd be hard-pressed to find a more skillful, soulful, and dynamic performer than today's guest. He has shared the stage with some of the biggest stars in the blues world. He's opened for B.B. King. He's opened for T-Bone Walker. He's worked with John Mayall, James Cotton, and A.C. Reed, just to name a few. His band has been like a blues college for those that have been fortunate enough to pass through it. He plays a multitude of instruments very well, and we are thrilled to have him in the studio with us today. Ladies and gentlemen, Chris Stovall Brown. Good morning, Chris, and welcome aboard.
Hi, Mike. Nice to be here.
Oh, yes, indeed. So one of the things we mentioned in the intro, you've had some pretty diverse folks come through your band. Jeff Pivar from Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young.
Yeah.
How did that come about?
Well, he replaced Carrot,
Yes.
Greg Burrell. He came out of a band in Connecticut that I went and scouted to basically raid their personnel, which at that point included Zip Zipfel, who later went on to radio fame, Zip and Something Show in WAAF. He was the drummer. Jeff was the guitar player, and if I'm not mistaken, Mike Ruff at that point was the keyboard player, which means he was probably about 13 because we put him on the road, and
Yeah.
Mike went on to be Shaka Khan's music director and Grammy Award band music director. So it was quite a field of people, but
Absolutely.
at that stage of the game, Jeff was doing, I don't know what Jeff was doing at that point. But
Yeah,
they came out of a band, if I remember right, it was called Bootleg.
but you found him. And you also opened for T-Bone Walker. I don't think there's too many folks around New England that can make that claim.
No.
So maybe the viewers would like to hear about how that came to be.
I was working with a band in Boston called Jasper Cook, which included bunch of guys, and we were being managed by Robin Hemingway, who was T-Bone's manager at the time. He was out of the Boston area, and T-Bone's band was out of the Boston area at that point, and included Paul Pena had just left the band. Paul wrote Big Jet Airliner for Steve. He didn't write it for Steve Miller, but his version never didn't come out until 2001, and. It was also Hartley Severance, who used to work at Wurlitzer, for those that are in our age group.
Yeah.
He was, if you ever went into Wurlitzer when it was still on Newbury Street, Hartley was probably the first person you saw. He played violin and sax in the band. And it was Vinnie Johnson, and I can't remember the bass player at that point. But Paul Pena had left the band, so T-Bone was actually the only guitarist in the band. At that point, T-Bone was playing mostly piano because he had some issues and preferred to sit down. But
And for the viewers out there, the younger guys, if you haven't been introduced to T-Bone's work, he's the real stuff. That's the foundation that a lot of folks have built careers on, and B.B. King has often acknowledged T-Bone as an influence on his playing. So that's phenomenal that you had the opportunity to do that. You know, I first saw you at the original Lupo's Heartbreak Hotel in Providence.
Okay.
And this is how I reached out to you. I think I wanted to clarify that it was you that I saw, because it was a long time ago. It was in the 80s, and you were opening for the Butterfield Blues Band. And I don't know, you had a 3 or 4 piece, I don't remember, but you told me a great story about playing harp that night and running into the dressing room where Butter was. I think the viewers would love to hear that.
Well, when I came in for the sound check, it's probably around 6 o'clock, Butter had been imbibing for several hours, double tequilas if memory serves correct. And shortly after I arrived there, he wanted to use my amp, and we got into a small tete-a-tete about the positioning of it. And I said, well, if you want to use my amp, it's got to go where I'm used to working it. And we settled that score. And then we left and came back for the show. And at that point, I think he had Harvey Brooks on bass, who I knew from the Rhinestones.
Mm-hmm.
Probably opened 20 shows for those guys. Great band that never went anywhere. And I think Cal David, who was also in the Rhinestones, was playing. And Crusher Green from Wilson Pickett's band. So they had kind of alerted me that things could be a little crazy with Butter, which was readily apparent. So I was only playing guitar. I had sax player and bass and drums with me. And typically I wasn't really playing much harp in those days, just teaching. And I decided after our little go-around that I would play a little bit of harp. And so I jumped off the stage and ran into the dressing room and got up in Butter's face a little closer than we are now. And he kind of rallied, and they had told me that he was mostly playing piano as well because he could sit down. And he came out and he rallied a little bit. He sounded pretty good.
That's a great story. That's fantastic. And that old original Lupo's, I mean, if those walls could have talked.
Yeah.
That was quite a place to play. That was a fun gig. I played it, I think, twice back in those days. And I can remember seeing chickens walking around in there and a stray dog laying on the floor by the bar. And it's like, this can't be downtown Providence where there's chickens, you know. But it was a pretty fun place.
Well, originally,
Rich was great.
Originally the stage was where it ended up.
Yeah.
But there was no stage there. And I was working with Luther Johnson, Georgia boy, not Guitar Junior, although they both worked with Muddy.
Yeah.
And I remember Luther was going to go to Europe to do a tour, and so we were basically out of work unless we could come up with some gigs. And I remember going down and approaching Rich Lupo, and as I learned later, Rich Lupo was very true to form, and that he didn't want to spend a whole lot of money, and we couldn't come to terms. And so we didn't end up playing there with that band, but I ended up playing there. Well, I had a steady Tuesday in there with a guy named Fat Man Wilson and the Sliders.
Yep.
And we were actually playing there during the blizzard of '78. So our equipment was in the basement. And now the stage was in the front window. Is that way Bossett Street, I think?
Yes.
And so Lupo said, well, if you can get down here, he says, I got about 50 people living here. He says, I'm feeding them. He says, if you come down, I'll give you $50 and drinks or something.
Wow.
So I was living on Smith Hill at that point, and we took the stuff we needed, amps and stuff, on a sled. And at that point, there was a curfew in the city, if I remember right, at a certain point, and there were National Guards at every corner, but they said, no, go ahead. So we went over and played the gig, and like 3 nights in a row over there, and then we'd come back, and Lupo would give us like a case of beer, and on the way back, we'd hand out beers to the National Guard
That's
guys.
awesome. Those were some great days. And there was a pretty healthy blues scene in New England. You know, there was a lot of places you could see really A-list talent. And speaking of A-list talent, I think I saw a video of you playing with Brad Whitford and James Montgomery in a show.
I was doing a gig with Montgomery.
Yeah.
And when I got to the gig, it was kind of sold to me as a bill of goods. It ended up being like a gun rally fundraiser in this huge, one of those blow-up stadium tent things.
Yes.
And it was Luther Johnson and Monty and a couple other local bands. And so I hadn't seen Guitar Junior or any of those guys in the longest time, and I'm sitting there, and Debbie Fain, who worked at Lupo.
I remember Deb. Sure.
Debbie used to be the light girl at Lupo's, and Paul Murphy's ex-girlfriend. And
God rest in peace.
She calls me up and she says, oh, we're going to have a rehearsal. And now they were like ensconced in some other building. She said, I'm sending a golf cart over for you. I'm like, okay, whatever. So I got over there, and Brad Whitford's there with his two sons, and his two sons are both playing guitar, and I walk in and I'm like, well, it looks like you guys got the guitar spot covered here. I said, you don't really need me. No, come on. And I had just bought this 2008 road-worn Telly.
Yes.
Now Brad's sitting there with probably $250,000 58 or 59 Les Paul, and I take the guitar out of the case and he starts salivating and he said, let me see that. And so he really was getting into it. He says, what did you pay for this? I said, I don't know, I worked a deal like $600 or something.
Yep.
Brand new. And so, oh, this is great guitar. And then we end up playing the gig, and in the video, one of his sons plays in it, and so it was like solo after solo. So it's like, well, what can you do after every note's already been played? So
Yeah, I thought you did pretty good. What I liked about it was, on the particular clip that I saw, you had the last solo, so you had
Right.
the nice position of being able to think of something unique, but at the same time, you had to follow a couple of pretty strong solos
Yeah.
that came before you. Brad did a really great solo, and I don't know who the guy next to him was playing the Strat, but he did a nice job.
that was his son.
Great player.
Yeah, he's a
But,
good player, very good player.
You could hear the blues rock influence in what they played. They were nice solos, a lot of feeling, but you hit it. It was like Albert Collins just jabbing you right in the face. It just was stone blue, and that Tully had a bite to it. It was distinctly unique from the smooth sound of the Les Paul type of thing. I just think, as we were talking earlier before the cameras were rolling, a Telecaster it's a magic kingdom, and to me, it's just an amazing.
Can do it all.
It's the
basically.
perfect guitar.
Yeah.
And you've got a pretty unique piece there.
Yeah.
That started life as something quite a bit
Started
different
as
than
a
what you got
Squire
now.
51, which I always liked the looks of. They were basically kind of, I guess they were rip-off of a Robin guitar, maybe.
Oh, right, I
from-
remember those, sure.
At some point, but it had a strap body with a telly neck and P-bass wiring. So, needless to say, I figured I bought it specifically as a vehicle to put this guitar together. But
So what's the pickup down by the bridge?
well, this is an early lap steel pickup, and the strings actually go right through. I don't know if you can see it or not.
Oh, yeah.
Strings go through the pickup itself. So it makes it a little difficult to do muting
Yeah.
or anything there. But it's basically a humbucking pickup, and the two pickups are wired out of, the three strings are wired out of phase. So you can't run it with any other pickup.
Right.
Because you'd have to have the other pickup wired half out of phase with itself.
Yep.
So that's the bridge pickup, and the neck pickup is a Curtis Novak reissue of a gold foil. Now the gold foils you would find on like Tiesco guitars and
Oh,
stuff,
yeah.
and the ones that we all threw away for 100 years. And
Now everyone wants the pickups.
well, it was kind of sparked by a guitar that Ry Cooder put together. Which is basically the same setup, except that he's using a Tiesco pickup. There's quite a bit of difference actually in the Tiesco pickups and the gold foils, in that they're just basically a cheap pickup, and they were somewhat microphonic. This one isn't really microphonic, but this really has a, as opposed to this one. So it gives me
Nice.
quite a combination.
Yeah.
But because there was no switch, I had to put in this push pot, which switches my pickups for me. And
Yes.
so that's basically.
Do you
what we
do
got
a
here.
bit of your own tech work?
I do a bit of it, and then once I ham it up, I take it to my luthier, and he straightens me out.
Yeah.
I don't do frets and stuff. I
No.
do intonation and setups, and
Yep.
and unless it's too complicated, I typically do my own wiring.
Yeah.
But
Oh, that's great. Well, it's over years, it saves you, a lot of money to know how to solder.
It does. It doesn't necessarily save you time, though.
Nope, nope. And, chasing specific types of tones costs time and money.
It does.
Certain types of gear are specific to certain sounds. And when you go through the door of the slide guitar world, that's a whole nother place into itself, and
It is.
different tunings, and
Yeah.
as you've just explained to the pickups, is that in an open tuning?
This is an open E tuning, which they call Sebastopol after a piece. It was an instrumental piece in an open D tuning, but this is basically the same tuning as an open D, but up
Up a whole
a
step.
full step. It's as if you were to fret an E chord and tune to those pitches there.
Ah.
I've kind of got out of the, your typical Elmore James, Dwayne Allman kind of
Right.
thing where, I try to stay away from that kind of a thing. And so typically I prefer to play in keys other than E,
Yeah.
kind of what I call a cross note tuning.
Yep.
A's particularly good, but I'll play in any key with anybody
Yep.
in this tuning. The other tuning, which is common, is what they call Spanish tuning,
Yeah.
which is an open G or an open A.
Yep.
This guitar is an open G, and it has between the two tunings, the G lends itself probably better to playing with by yourself. It's a rounder sounding tuning. The E, you have to struggle a little more. The chords are not quite as
You're right.
easy to come by.
Well, let's let the viewers hear a little something on that. You've got a nice arrangement of a piece here that they'd love to hear. So
Okay.
tell us a little bit about what you're going to do
Well,
here.
this is Amazing Grace, which we can all use a whole lot more of in this world these days.
Yeah, that's for
More
sure.
and more day by day, I think. It's a piece I've always liked. I've probably recast this song, many different tunings, many different ways of doing it. This is probably close to the way I do it these days.
Nice. And I'd like to, if it's okay with you, I'd like to dedicate this to the victims of the violence that took place in Taunton at the Galleria Mall a
Yes,
few
let's
days
do
ago.
that.
It was a terrible tragedy, and we'd like to extend this out to the families.
Absolutely, absolutely. Anyways.
Wow, that was fantastic.
Thank
How
you.
long did you embrace the slide early in your guitar career?
I did. I probably was playing slide 1968, 69,
Wow.
something like that. I was very fortunate to. My parents were divorced, so we used to go with my father on Saturdays. I grew up, did my school years in Warwick, and my father lived on the east side of Providence, which at
Yep.
that point was the Haight-Ashbury of Rhode Island. Anyway.
I went to school in South Providence in the late 60s.
Oh, okay.
And I got the crap kicked out of me every day. That was the toughest part of town.
Yeah, yeah.
I was out of there by the time I went to middle school when we came to Taunton. But I remember the east side and south E all pretty well back in those days during the Watts riots and all
Yeah,
that stuff. And boy, so you found this music as a real young guy, as a kid.
I had already been into jazz at a very early age, like before the Beatles.
Wow.
See, I was started as a drummer, and so I was listening to Elvin Jones before I heard the Beatles. I remember my father coming home with the My Favorite Things album by John Coltrane.
Wow.
And so when I saw Ringo, it was like, wow, he's a long ways from Elvin Jones.
So it wasn't an easy task to find these incredible blues records back then with slide players, obviously. I mean, it's not like you could crank on a local Rhode Island
Well,
RKO and suddenly hear Elmo coming out of the
Well,
speaker.
Rhode Island was a very good scene actually for blues and rhythm and blues because Rhode Island was part of the Chitlin Circuit. There was a club called the Celebrity Club in Randall Square in the late 50s. They're doing a documentary, whether we'll ever see the day of light.
Right.
And next to that was Carl Henry's Carl's Diggins record store. Years later, he moved up to South Main Street. And
Yeah.
so there was always that, and then there was Muffet's Music downtown, and it would be,
Wow.
and then, you know, with the advent of the college stuff, you'd had Ladd's Music up on the east side. So there was a lot of records you
That's
had
great.
access to, probably more so than in most places.
Right. So you had a lot of access then to the
Right. And,
great slide stuff.
you know, you'd go into Muffet's and, you know, you'd see somebody else looking in the blues. Like I remember seeing Duke Robillard when he was still Mike Robillard.
Yeah.
Like, who is that guy? You know, you'd strike up a conversation.
Everyone's got a Duke story. The first time I heard him, I was about 17 maybe, and I wandered into the original location of Ray Mullen Music in Pawtucket, and he was in there trying out a guitar, and I heard chord changes and things going on that were way beyond my skill level, and I was like, what is that?
Yeah.
And Mr. Mullen came over and said, that's Duke Robillard right there. He told me who it was. He was Duke by then. You know, I
Right.
think Roomful was starting out. Or he might have been with Kenny Lyons. I don't know. But
Well, that's when he was Sugar Bear.
yeah.
I hated that name. See, I knew him for Mike, and then I remember Roomful of Blues still being Chicago blues band, no horns.
Wow.
And
We're going to get him on the show. He said as soon as he finishes up the production work and things that he's been working on, he's going to come on too. So that'll be great.
Yeah.
But so you're already playing slide in your teens, so that sets you apart right off the bat, and that must have opened some doors too. I mean, to get in with some of the
Well,
older blues guys.
yeah, I had I was lucky with my choices. I went to the Ann Arbor Blues Festival in 1970. I told my mother I was going camping in East Greenwich, and my college girlfriend said she was going camping on the Cape, and we
Wow.
took a VW Bug to Ann Arbor, and we went to the Ann Arbor Blues Festival, and I mean that was just
Yeah.
Fred McDowell was there, and I mean everybody, you know, it was
Right. Fred had a real, to me, anytime I listen to his music, he scares me in the way John Lee Hooker used to. There was something in his spirit that came out of that music, in his guitar, that you could tell the soul of that man was being put right before you, the way Son House could do it. And
yeah.
not too many people left that can do that. and really testify when they play. And I think you're doing that. I think you're carrying that tradition on of really testifying when
All we
you
can
play.
do is
and
try.
that's what music's supposed to do. It's supposed to convey that emotion, and that's what blues does. But we are winding down. Maybe we could let the folks hear you do a little picking on that nice...
Sure.
Nice... that a tricone?
This is a tricone. This
Yeah.
is, as they now call them, Pan-Asian. And I just recently bought this one.
And folks, we're going to have his website up when, so that you can go see where Chris is playing and find out a little bit more about him and his music. And you're going to want to get a copy of this. This is something you guys are going to want to have. For the real blues fans out there,
You have to get that through the website because it's,
Get on the
it's
site.
now out of print.
and get one of these, because there's not a lot of the original guys left in New England that are doing what this man still is bringing to us on a regular basis. So why don't you take us out with some picking?
Okay, this will be one of the ones off of the CD here.
Nice.
Tune I wrote called GT Blues, which stands for G tuning. Hopefully I'll remember it. Split-second decision, glance shot across the room. Temperature's rising, and I could feel it too. Heart and bypass that you can't forget. You feel like doing something you might later regret. I'm not here to judge just what you do. I just said, hey, I tell stories sad and true. It's not the first time, you know it won't be the last. I've seen it happen so many times.